G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. I've got a new little pattern for you today. It is my little Patchwork Kangaroo. Now, she's a little Mama-maroo and she has her little baby Joey there. I'm sure you can see, and she's made up very simply out of your patchwork fabrics, and I'm sure you've all got a whole heap in your stash, because that's what I did. I just dived into my stash to create this little one. I'm actually very familiar with the kangaroo. They're a big part of our daily life here in Australia, and particularly where we are. It's not unusual for me to go out in my backyard and there's 4 or 5 just sitting there. So they often come for afternoon tea. So I enjoy seeing them, and it's nice to make this one up for you all. Now all you need to do is click on the link in the description box below and you'll find your free pattern templates as usual. All you need to do is print those out, and make sure you set your printer at actual size before you print them out. You want those pattern templates to be exactly right. And now let's get busy making Mama-maroo. So let's get started today on our little Mama Kangaroo, okay? And we're going to go through our materials and requirements. Now you can see that I have actually made her up with a variety of just quilting fabrics, quilting cottons, and I've made just her head and her little baby in felt. So that's the best combination, and it does allow you to use up all of your little scraps from your stash. So we'll start with our side body pieces, and I have those cut from quilting cotton with my favourite fusible woven interfacing on the back. And it is just a medium weight, and you'll definitely need to interface this project. You'll need your 2 little thigh pieces, and they also have the interfacing applied. The little thigh pieces are these little pieces in here. You'll need your base piece, which creates our little front feet and our little tail. You can see I've got those actually pinned together. So it's 2 of those, and I'm using the same fabric that I've used for the side panels. And then you'll need your little arm pieces. Now I also cut these little arm pieces with the interfacing applied. I cut the same colour. So you'll notice that I'm keeping my side panels and my little feet and tail section there, and my little arms, I've cut them all in the same print. Now you can really mix it up. You don't have to do that. But I just find it really pulls it all together. If those pieces are all cut from the same fabric, whatever you do with the rest of it really tends to just be just the best way to go about it. So our next piece is our centre gusset. Our centre gusset runs up the front of our little kangaroo, and I always use a nice light cream fabric because our little kangas usually have a fairly light tummy. And also it means that that little baby really stands out when he's popped in that little pocket there. Our little Joey, he really stands out there. So I always go for a cream or something light. That one is also interfaced. And you need your little pouch. Now with your pouch, that's where you can bring some colour in and add a little bit of difference. This one you can see that I've gone for a nice little floral there to make that a bit of a feature. And I'm going to be doing the same here with a little grey with the roses. You'll also need a base piece for the bottom, because we're going to be drawing all of this in, and we need a nice little stable base underneath there. And so I have that one cut from 2 pieces of matte board. It is picture framing matte board. I get it from my local picture framer. He keeps me all his little offcuts. And I've actually glued those 2 pieces together, so it's as strong as a little wooden board. It really has no give in it at all. And then we need his face pieces. So as I said, we cut those from felt. So I have my front and back head pieces, and they also have the interfacing applied. And then we have the little features, and the little features are his little muzzle section. And that is cut from felt with heat and bond applied, because we're pressing that one on. Same with the little nose, that one is felt with heat and bond applied, and the same with our little ear inserts. Little pieces of felt with that heat and bond applied. So that's all very simple. Our little Joey is made of several little pieces, just a mini version of Mum. So we've got our 2 head pieces, cut just the same with our interfacing applied on those. Our two little body pieces, they are cut the same, felt with interfacing applied, because this little Joey, I'm just going to remove him there from his snug little place. He's just got his little torso that we tuck into that little mama's pocket there, and it's quite a snug little fit. Pop you back in there, little Joey. Mama's arms back there. There we go. So he's just a little body with his little arms. So they've also got interfacing applied. And then our little arms, they're just cut from a piece of double felt. Now double felt is two pieces of felt joined together with heat and bond. And then we cut our pattern piece from that. I've got a video that shows you how to create double felt. I'll put that link up top there for you. It also gives you some good tips on working with felt and preparing felt, so you can check that out. We also need a little tiny muzzle piece for our little baby, and in the middle of the body section I put a little filler of stiffened felt. Stiffened felt should be readily available everywhere. It's just felt that has just been hardened, but it's still flexible. If you can't find stiffened felt, perhaps just use just a small piece of firm cardboard. Cardboard will work because we leave a space at the top, so we'll still get our needle through. But you definitely need that little bit of strength to be tucking into that little pouch there. You'll also need two little buttons for your Mama Roo's eyes, and I've got tiny little doll buttons there. And you'll need a button for joining the head on at the back, just a medium size button there like I have, you can see. Something that will coordinate. We will need some polyester filling. We will need some clear craft glue that's suitable for fabric, that's nice and quick drying. And also you will need your extra strong threads and perhaps some embroidery threads just for doing the little stitching on the face pieces and so on, but you'll definitely need your extra strong thread for drawing in that base. So our first step, let's move everything out the way. And we're going to start on our little body, but the first thing we need to do is prepare our little arms because they're popped into the seam. So we've got our two pairs of arms there, and you can see I've got right sides together. So first job is to just stitch, leaving this section open. We're just going to stitch all the way around the outer edge of that little arm and finish here. Make sure that you're back and forth on your start and finish. I try and keep that seam allowance down to almost a 3mm seam allowance, really quite tiny, because they are tiny little arms and then they are much easier to turn through. So there you can see that's my two little arms, and I've turned them through, pushed those seams out really well with my knitting needle, and I've actually given the top part of them a little press so that they're nice and flat, ready to go into that seam. So we can pop those aside because our next step is we're going to add our little pouch. So the first thing that we do, you can see there that I have actually pressed that top edge under of the longer edge. I've pressed that top edge under just a few millimeters, and then I've just sewn a top stitch across that top edge, so that's a nice neat finish. And now we're going to pop that little piece straight over the other piece. You'll see where that all lines up. And make sure that you've got these leg curves perfectly lined up. And you will have your corners extending. That's okay, they're supposed to. We want to give a little bit of room in our pouch. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and stitch just inside my seam allowance, so as close as I can to the edge, just that full curve on each side, and that's just to hold that little pouch into place before we go to our next step. So it's just a little quick machine stitch right close to the edge on both of those curves. So that has my little pouch piece just stitched, just tacked into place there. Now our next step, you can see there when I turned that top edge over of this little one, we end up with these little points. Now we can just take those little points off to give us a straight little seam there. Now you can see that I left those edges open, so we only stitched the curve only. And our next step is we're just going to pull this little side piece to meet up with the side seam. Now the reason why we do this is it's going to give us a tiny bit more room in our little pouch. It just pulls that front section forward just a little bit. It's a snug little pouch, but we need enough room to slip that little joey in. So you see I've just pulled that top line in to meet up here, and I'm going to do the same little tacking stitch on the machine straight down that side. You can pop a clip or a pin in there if you like, and then we do the same with the other one, that we're going to line it up. And you can see there it's given that little pouch just that little bit more room there, and when we fill it out it really will come in quite tight there, but it's just that little bit of difference. So tack those two side pieces into place either by hand or on the machine. So there I have that little pouch section stitched into place. You can see there that I've kept everything nice and flat on those sides, but it's given us a little bit of room in that pouch. So our next step is we're going to sew our little thigh piece into our leg curve, which is probably the most challenging part of this whole project. But if we're going to be going ahead and working more in 3D work, putting little pieces like this, it's something that we really need to know how to do. And once you've done a few of them, you're going to find it really easy. And it's often about the pinning more than anything else. So we're going to start with our straight edge of our thigh piece. And the top of the thigh is the chunkier part. And we're going to be sewing this straight edge into this curve here. So we've got right sides together with our chunky part of our thigh at the top. And we're going to start by lining up that top edge. You want a little point extending. You can see there we've got that little point extending, which gives us our seam allowance. And we're going to pop in our first pin. And I like to pin it, go through both layers, flip it over, take a little on the other side, because it gives us flexibility as we're marrying up those two edges. So go along a little further, make sure you're bringing that straight edge up to match that curved edge, pin through both, flip it over, take a little on the other side. And we're just going to continue matching up that edge all the way till you get right up to the end here, and you should have at the end a little point extending the same as you did the first. I'm going to pin it all the way and I'll show you how that looks. So that's it pinned all the way. See, pinning it that way gives you that nice rounded 3D look, and it also helps you to mould it to that shape. So once you have that pinned into place, you've got your two little points are extending on both edges. That one's just slipped down a little. Both those little points are extending. Now I fully advise you to take your extra strong thread. I've just got a knot in the end, and I'm just going to tack that little piece into place with an overcasting stitch, because it's just such a crucial little part of your animal. I can remove my pins as I go, because we definitely don't want to be trying to sew this on the machine with pins in the way. And you can't meet those edges up unless you've got them tacked together. So I'm just going to make, you can see I'm just doing that little overcasting stitch. And I'm going to continue on right to that other edge. And that has that little thigh piece all tacked in place. So now I really can't go wrong with this. So I can take this to the machine now, tuck it under my machine, and I can sew that little lead curve in. Now notice that I'm working on the gusset piece. I haven't flipped it over. I'm not sewing it on this way. We need to sew from the gusset piece. So once that one is stitched into place, you can just repeat the process with the other thigh piece on the other side. Do exactly the same thing. match that one up, tack it into place, and then stitch that seam. There we go. So that has both of those little thigh sections stitched in, and that seam allowance is actually about 4 millimeters. So, and I have my stitch length set at 2, so it's a nice close little stitch. So once you've got those both stitched in, make sure that you really roll out those while you can and get that seam really well pressed out, especially right down at the base here for when we add our side pieces. And you can see that I've then gone ahead and I have just tacked into place my 2 little arm pieces, just facing in on the front panel, because we've got little marks on your pattern template that should be there, and your little arms, the mark is the base of the arm on each side. So just you'll see that they'll fit the same curve, and just tack those into place. So that's your little front section already, and we will now just go ahead and we're going to take our 2 side body pieces, and with right sides together we're going to match up that top point, and we're going to, you can throw a couple of pins in, clips, right down to that base there, and we're going to sew a 4 millimeter seam allowance from the top there. Make sure you're back and forth all the way down to the base there and back and forth at the base. There we go, you see that back seam is stitched, and I've gone ahead and pressed the top section of that back seam nice and open and flat. And now we can start sewing our body, completed body, back to our body front. So what we're going to do, on the back of your gusset piece you will have a centre mark there that you would have transferred from your pattern, and the first thing we're going to do is just meet up that centre mark with our center seam so that it's absolutely exact. I like to throw a little clip on there to keep that into place. And notice that I'm working from the back section, I'm not working from the front section. So now what we're going to do is line up this front section right the way down to that little thigh. We have to make sure that we've really pulled that little thigh section nice and open and flat. We keep that little seam running downwards, and we're going to meet up that corner where our thigh starts. There's a little corner there, and it's right there on that junction where you want to add a little pin so that that's very carefully anchored into place. This section will meet up beautifully, you can see there. You want to throw a couple of pins or clips in there. This is where the little arm is going to be incorporated into the seam. And now we just need to fit those 2 pieces together, those 2 thigh pieces. It's just about matching them up. As you pull them around, you'll see that they'll match up. And you just add your pins, pinning normally this time. Follow that line. Again, we're going to pull out the base section here. We're going to push that seam down, and we're just going to travel. I'm going to keep pinning. Right to the base there. Pull that one out flat, fold that one over, and your 2 edges will meet up right to the base there. So you can see we've got that little front section all pinned into place, and it's matching up that thigh. And so I do overcast this section also. I just find it much easier. It's so easy for things to slip when you're stitching on the machine with all those pins. So take the time to go with your overcasting stitch again right up that side, and then I will take this one to the machine and sew that 4 millimeter seam allowance. Make sure you really reinforce over that little arm section, and also this little corner here. As you turn that little corner, Make sure you back and forth on that little corner there, and we stitch right the way down. And then we just repeat the same process, matching up the other side, and do the same thing, still working from the back section. So that has one of my front side seams all stitched into place, and before you add the other one, you can turn that one through and just check that you've caught absolutely everything, and that little arm is nicely incorporated and there's no frayed edges at all. And you can take the opportunity to roll those seams out, especially in that thigh section there, and then we can flip that one through and we repeat just exactly as we did before by matching up the opposite side. We don't need to leave an opening because this is our opening at the base. So I will now go ahead and do the same with that side. So there we go, that has my little kanga body all stitched up both sides and meeting up the top there. And now we just need to turn that one through. I've made it in this way, designed it in this way, so that we don't have, throughout this whole project, we have no openings to close, which is always a bonus. If you hate ladder stitch as much as I do, I don't know why I hate it. It's not difficult, I just would rather not do it. So this one is closing free, which is good. So we just want to push out all of those seams, get that one all pressed out and roll out those seams between your fingers and thumbs, and we'll be ready for filling. So I'm going to start adding my filling with the help of I'm going to get my longer forceps, which are great for filling, and I start obviously at the very top. Now when you're filling this top section, if you hold it the way that I am, you're supporting the end there. We want to be remembering that this top very top part there is where we're going to be adding the head. So if you can stuff it in a way that keeps that section just a little bit flatter by going from side to side, that's how we're going to compress that little top section there, you can see. So we keep it all, if we can, nice and flat. Still nice and firm, because it needs to be very firm to be able to hold that little head. So I'll just be packing that in, and then I will be making my way all the way down. The other section you need to watch, it's very easy to fill this little body. You'll find you'll get down to about pouch level, and you find you can tip it over, and you can be using your fingers to tuck that filling into those little thigh pieces. You want those nicely filled out, and then keep packing right up into the top. You're going to leave it just a little way from the edge, and you can go ahead, if you have a wool felting needle that I use for packing, I'll show you at the end there, and we will be packing that in as we go, but you really do want this body quite firm, so that it holds itself very well and everything gets pulled in and holds its shape. So you can see there's very little give in that body there. So I'm going to continue up, fill that one all the way up, make sure I get those little thigh sections until I get right almost to the top. So there I have my little body, it's all packed out and it's all nice and firm, including those little thigh sections there. And I've been able to take my felting needle, this is a wool felting needle, and I've been able to pack that filling nice and flat, so it's very little give in that at all. And also I've been able to angle my felting needle down into that thigh section so that they stay nicely filled out and that filling won't move. So now that I've got that nice and flat, you can see that's only around about a centimetre from the edge that I filled that to. Now we're going to add our little disc, that we've had ready, and you can see that I've gone ahead with my doubled thread of extra strong thread on my needle, and I've left the tail ends hanging, and I have gone around with a little running stitch right the way around that edge, all the way around to the back again, and now I've got those two ends that I can pull in. Make sure my little disc is nicely centered. Very hard to show you on camera, but I will pull that right in, make my first knot. You can see I can pull that in, and I'm just going to make sure that I am getting that, oops, right in the centre there. You want your pull in to leave only about that much showing. So we're going to be covering that base, but we do need it to be pulled in that much. So I'm going to now knot that off about 4 times. And that has that little section of my body all pulled in there. I actually went round there the second time with my thread, so that's all nicely pulled in. That has that part of our little body all complete, and we can just pop that aside there. And now we're going to create the little feet and the tail. So I've got my 2 pieces together, right sides together, and we're going to create an opening in the base here, so we don't have to leave an opening. And all we need to do is sew that little 4mm seam allowance around the entire outside edge of that shape on the machine. Now once you have that little base all stitched around, you can see that across the very centre of that circle part of that base there, I've just drawn a line which is just about 4 centimetres across. Just leave yourself about 1 centimetre either side, and I've drawn that line, and then I've just snipped only 1 layer, so the other side is untouched. So there's a little opening there now. And now I'm just going to also just take my little sharp scissors, and the only curve I'm going to clip into is this one at the front. Don't clip into your stitches, just close to them. It just helps that little curve go around nicely when we turn it through. And so now I'm just going to take my forceps, and I'm going to start with my little front feet. I simply need to turn that through the right way. I'll take the feet through first, one at a time, same with the other one, and then the little tail through that opening, and I will pull it all through, push it out with my knitting needle, and I'm going to give it a good press. So that's our little base piece all turned through and pushed out and pressed, and particularly this section here, you want this little round section all pressed out perfectly there. And now we're going to add just a tiny little bit of filling. Now there's not much needed at all. There's a tiny little bit at the very end. There's nothing from there on. You can see just a little tiny bit at the front, and from about there down I filled that little tail. We keep the rest of it all nice and flat. So the best way to do that again is just with our, if you have forceps, and we just tuck that filling right down to the end. Still pack those areas nice and firm, and when I'm doing my little front feet, I like to get the filling in there and then take my little wool felting needle, you can see, and I'm being very mindful of the fact that I want those little feet to sit quite flat, and if anything turned down. But I can get my wool felting needle down there, slip it between the layers, and I can actually pack that fibre nice and tight into the toes, so that will hold it in place. You can also go ahead and stitch when it's all filled. You can go ahead and stitch some little claws in if you want. That's totally up to you. You don't have to. I won't with this one because I really won't be terribly visible. So I'm going to go ahead and add that little bit more on this side and finish filling my little tail. Now once you have all of that filling in place, I hope you can see that, I've gone ahead, yes you can see that, and I've added my circle of clear craft glue almost to the edges and right the way around the front, and make sure that the whole section is nicely coated. And now we're going to add that to the base of our little kangaroo, which is as simple as flipping it over. Now you can line it up at the front first. Now it should sit just about level with the front there. Just enough just to cover that little front section there. Turn it over, make sure you've got it all nicely lined up. And a good way to check it is that your tail runs central from your center seam. So pull it and adjust it till you've got everything absolutely lined up and right. And then we're just going to press that one into place. We're going to be sewing a little blanket applique stitch around some of those edges, not all. So you want to make sure that particularly on your little leg sections here and your little tail section, that that's all nicely pressed down. Check it from every angle. You see that you should just have that lined up right with the front there. So we don't actually want to see that curve. And that has our little body almost completed. So we're just going to set that one aside to dry before we do our last little bit of stitching on that body. So my little kangaroo base is all nice and dry, and we are going to go ahead and sew our blanket applique stitch. Now I'm using pearl thread, it's an 8 ply, and I have a knot in the end. Now I've just come in at the front here and I've just hidden that knot in there, so that's my entry point. So that little knot is tucked in there, and I've come out right on the edge there of the body part there. So you can see that my first stitch is only going to be about 4 millimeters. And we're going to take that through. You're going through a few layers there, so you might want to have your forceps ready if you need to pull that needle through. Now I'm coming through the loop. Now ideally you would use a coordinating thread for this. You can see I'm going through all of the layers, and I'm taking up, making sure I'm taking up some on that underside of that little body there, because we're just wanting to bind that little side edge to that base there. Really pull that stitch in, and you can see that that's just going to join those two pieces together. Take my next stitch, keep your stitches nice and even, making sure that you're taking up some of that body fabric and coming through the loop each time. And pulling that one in tight, so you can see. Now I'm going to stitch just to the base of that tail there. Then I'm going to start on the other side of the tail, and I'm just going to stitch down to the same level here. And I'm just going to do a few stitches just at the front there. And I'll show you on the other one. It's easier to see on the other one. The colour is a bit easier to see. So you can see there with that stitching, just from the side there to the base of the tail, from that side, and there's about probably, what have we got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 7 stitches there at the front. That just brings that all in together. And your tail and your little feet set free. So I'm going to go ahead and make all those stitches, and that will be it for our little body. So that has my little base all sewn into place, and that is it for my body. You might also notice that I have had my little arms pinned into place. I get those pinned in as soon as I can. It just encourages those little arms to sit forward. You can stitch them into place from behind. You can pull a stitch through from behind. I tend to like mine just to sit naturally like that and tuck under little Joey's ears. So I just have them, and that encourages them as we go along. So now we need to get on with the little head. We need to hurry up, we're burning daylight. So let's get started on that little head. So we're going to begin with the little face features. Now we've got our little ear sections here, and on your pattern pieces you have little marks that tell you the top of the ear. and I mark them on the back of my heat and bond paper there. Your stronger curve goes to the inside of the ear, and your straighter edge lines up with the side of the ear. It gives it that proper little kangaroo shape there. You want to press those into place, making sure that you've left room on the edge for our little blanket stitch that we're going to be doing on both sides. So you just want to make sure you've just got enough room to do a small blanket stitch there. Now you can press those on with a hot iron and a protective cloth, and then we're going to press that little muzzle section in too. Just leave yourself a little bit of room on the edges there for your seam, but we do want it to be quite low and just reveal a little bit of chin there. Make sure it's lined up with the top center of the head. Get those all pressed on with a hot iron and protective cloth, and then I'm going to go ahead and stitch very close to the edge of those little ear pieces on the machine in a matching thread. I do that section on the machine because I like it to be all nice and flat and very neat and tidy there, because we're going to be doing a hand stitch around it. So I'm going to go ahead and get those pieces in place. So now that I have my little ear pieces in place there, I'm going to sew my little muzzle piece on using a blanket applique stitch. Now, if you haven't sewn this one before, I'm going to put a link up the top there for you that I have a video that shows you how to sew this stitch. I'm using my extra strong thread as my embroidery thread, as I often do. If you're using just stranded cotton, probably just use 2 strands because it's a very small area. So I've come in from behind, I've got a knot in the end. Come in from behind right on the edge of that shape there, and we're just going to make our first stitch, and I'm going to keep them really, really tiny. So I'm making sure that I'm going through both layers and taking up some of that underneath layer and coming out through that loop to create our first little stitch. And I'm going to make sure that I keep those stitches all the same and coming out right on that edge of that little shape each time, and coming through the loop with my needle. You can use a contrasting thread if you want to. If you're using bright colours, you might want to really change it up a little. I'm keeping it all quite natural. So you can see there, I've got my 3 little stitches there, and that's going to create that lovely little binding edge, and I'm going to make my way all the way around that little shape there. So there I have my little muzzle piece stitched into place nicely, and I've gone ahead and pressed on my little nose piece. You can see exactly where that sits. It's just about 3/4 centimetre from the very base there. And I've also made a little mark directly below the point, lowest point of that nose, and that is probably about 2-3 millimeters. I'm going to cover this template with my black extra strong thread. I'm using it as an embroidery thread again. I've got 2 strands, and I'm going to start down at this little mark that I've made here, because that's going to become part of my little kangaroo smile. So come in from behind, I've got a knot in my threads, and I'm going to take my threads all the way up to the top of that template. And I'm going to make sure that they're not twisted. See that there? And I'm going to take my needle and go straight in the center at the top of that little shape. Again, checking that they're not going in twisted, and pull both those threads down evenly. So that's my first little stitch, and the rest of my smile will come up either side here. But for now, I'm going to continue on and covering that little template with my stitches each side. So I'm going to come at the base again, right on the edge of that little shape. Check check my little threads aren't crossed, and go in right next to the first stitch. Again, checking that my threads aren't twisted, and then I'll cross over to the other side. And do the same thing. And I'm just going to go back and forth across that template, going from side to side until I've got the whole section of that little template covered, and then I'll come down and stitch in my 2 little stitches going into the center to create that little smile. So there you can see my little nose stitched in, and my little V-shaped little mouth. Kangaroos have a very distinctive little V-shaped mouth, so that's all stitched in there now. So now all we need to do is add our head back to our head front, and we're just going to line up those sides, and the seam we're going to sew is just that little 4mm seam allowance. I'm going to sew from the base of this ear right the way around to the base of this ear. Make sure you back and forth on your start and your finish, and we leave this top ear section open. So that has my little head all stitched and turned through. I've taken my knitting needle and pushed those seams right out. We can see that our little ears match up nicely there. Now we're just going to add some filling. It doesn't take a lot, but we do want to plump that little face out, starting of course down the bottom, and really fill that little chin section out. And we'll fill that little head quite firm up until the ears. And as you go, you can be using your felting needle to pack those fibres in, because we want to be adding our little eyes, and we want a nice firm little head to sink those little eyes into. So fill that little head right up until the top of the ears here, and then we're going to be gluing those together. Right, so once you've got your head filled, you can see there, just pull those ears down. I've just gone ahead with my clear craft glue, and I've added glue on the back of the ears, each side, and just a little bit in the center there. And now we're just going to first line up the little ears and join them together. It's easier to do them one at a time. We can add a little clip, match up the other one, and then we can pull this section out. You can still take, if you've got any filling there trying to pop out, tuck your little needle in there, and we can add that third clip in the center just to hold that, and then we're going to let that one dry for around about 15 minutes. Now once those little ears are dry, we can sew our little blanket stitch around the top part of that little head. I've got my extra strong thread again, and I've come in at the back and I've sunk my knot into the back of that head, and I've come out right at the base of that ear, right between those 2 layers there. And so it's just a normal blanket stitch, but we're going to keep our stitches nice and small. So we're going to go through both layers at the very base of that ear and come out through the loop. If you haven't sewn a blanket stitch before, I'm going to put a link up the top there to a video that I've done that shows you exactly how to sew that one. So we're just going to make little stitches, go through both layers, bring our needle out through the loop each time, and that's going to give us a nice little binding stitch that will also outline that little ear. You can see that I'm going for a contrasting colour that's going to match the darker part of my little kangaroo body. And all I need to do is continue with that stitch, rotating my work as I go, and I'm going to work that stitch all the way to the other side of the ear there. Once your stitching is done, our next step is to add our little eyes. You can see that I've made a little mark there either side of that little muzzle section, and it's about 1 centimetre down from the top of the muzzle. That's your eye position there. Make sure they're the same on each side. And I have my double thread, so I'm putting on a simple little doll button here. So I'm going to come in from behind. We add them now because we can get that nice little bit of pull in. Our knots will be hidden at the back of the head because the head is attached this way, so we won't see those. So I'm just going to come out right that side of that little button, of that little mark, sorry. And it's a double thread that I'm using of my extra strong. So I only need to go through this button one time, and I come through the back of my button and back through the front again, and just the other side of that little mark, and come out in the center. And I'll make sure that my little threads aren't twisted. And you can see I can really give some nice little depth to that little eye there. So I'm going to keep my thumb there, my finger, and squeeze and keep up that tension while I take a little anchoring stitch back here. Just to be absolutely sure that tension is going to stay. So you can see I've got that one nicely locked in. Now all I need to do is come back into the head, out through that other eye, mark there, and repeat the process with the second eye. And so there we have our completed little Mama face, and they do have a very sweet face, very sweet nature, the little girl kangaroos in our area. However, I do a 5-kilometre walk every morning in the bush, and I sometimes come across the great big males standing up there with their great big Arnold Schwarzenegger muscles, and they can be quite frightening, let me tell you. So I let them have right of way. So, but the little ladies really are a lovely little sweet animal. So let's just attach this finished head to the body now, and that is a very simple process. I have my doubled strand of extra strong thread which I've taken through my needle, so now I have 4 strands. We want that to be nice and strong. We've got our button for joining. It doesn't matter whether it's a 2-hole or a 4-hole, we're only going to use 2 of those holes. We're going to go in through one of those holes in the button. We want to just leave a little bit of space around that button. So going to come in at the back there, one side of that seam. Make sure that you're coming out straight through the front there and in the centre. And then we're going to take a nice big bite from the back of the head, and it really is central, midway through the back of the head there. Pull that one through, don't lose our button on the other end. And then we're going to go back through. just come out the other side on the back. And through that other hole in the button. It all looks very fiddly. It just looks fiddly because it's hard to show you on camera. Make sure that your threads aren't twisted, and then you can pull that one in and you can check your little head placement. Check that it's where you want it to be, and once you're sure, we just compress all of those layers, really squeeze that in, and then we're going to knot off on that button at least 4 times. And I have just knotted that one off just about 4 times and snipped those thread ends. You could also re-thread those thread ends and take them back into your little body if you like. And that has our completed little Mamaroo. And she's all ready, but she needs her little Joey. So let's get started on little Joey, which is a quick little job. So we're going to start with our body pieces. We've got our 2 body pieces and we've got our little felt filler. That is, I am using my stiffened felt, and I've glued up the back of that one, and I'm just going to sit that one on the lower edge, leaving room around it so that I can do my stitching. So I've pressed that one into place, add a little bit more glue, and it's really just to hold those 2 pieces together. Line that one up. And we will let that dry for about 10 minutes. Once that little body is dried, we can go ahead and sew the same blanket stitch that we sewed on our little ears, little mama's ears, right the way around the outside of that little body. You can see I've come in at the top there. My little knot will be hidden when we add our little head and arms, so we won't see that, and I've come out between the 2 layers, and I'm just going to sew a very small little blanket stitch, and then I'm going to do the same thing. As you can see, I've already done that here on my double felt little arms. Started at the top, hidden that knot there because the little face is going to be sitting over it, and sewn that tiny little blanket stitch all the way around the outside edge of the arms, and I will keep the stitches the same size on the little body. So there I have my little body and my little arms with their blanket stitching all done, and they can be put aside. And now we're going to work on our little Joey's little head. Now you can see there that I have added that little muzzle piece, pressed that one in place, and I have sewn a tiny little blanket applique stitch around it. Now I understand if that little piece is a little bit small for some of you to manage, perhaps you could just use a little running stitch done by hand. If you want to pop it under the machine, you could to stitch that on, or alternatively just leave that muzzle piece off altogether, and you can have just a plain coloured little face, which will work just as well. And you can see that I've just stitched in just a little cross. So it's just a tiny little cross to indicate a little nose and mouth. I think it's the simplest way to do a tiny little animal face like that. But if you don't put the muzzle piece on, you can just do that little cross over there the same. You may want to do a little smile instead with a little stitched nose. That's entirely up to you. And so now we've got to that point now. So now we're going to put our head pieces together. Now this one we're not turning through. We're going to stitch the blanket stitch around the entire outside of this little one. And we will be starting at the base of the ear. And I'm going to be using that same thread. That extra strong thread. I'm going to start at the base of the ear, and I'm going to blanket stitch all the way around to the base of the other ear, the other side, and I'm going to leave my thread on so that we can fill that little head and then close those ears. So there I've got my little head there, all stitched up to the other side. Got my needle still on there, and I have added a little bit of filling in that head, and I've been able to get in there with my wool felting needle and pack that all down to keep it there. And now, just as we did with Mama Roo's ears, we're going to glue the back ears. Just a little bit of glue there, and we're going to clamp those together and let that dry. Once it's dry, we're just going to continue on and finish our stitching just as we did with little Mama Roo's ears there. So that has my little tiny Joey head all completed. You can see I've gone ahead there and just added 2 little sunken stitches for the eyes, just as we did on Mama Roo with her eyes, and have just pulled those in, secured from behind. So now all we need to do is join all these little body parts together, and I've got my doubled thread of extra strong thread, something that is matching, and I've got my little arms over the front of my little body meeting up at the top there, and we're just going to go in from behind, and it's just like we attached the head, and we're going to go all the way through, leave some tail ends hanging. We're going to take our little head there, and it's right across the center there for positioning. Take a nice big bite. We're not using a button this time because it's so tiny and it really doesn't need it. We're going to go back in again and come out the back, just the other side. Pull all of those threads in. And we will have a little Joey head nicely positioned over those little arms and that body there. And all we need to do is just tie that one off, just as we did with Mama's head. And there we have our finished little Mama Roo with little Joey in her pouch. Now, she could easily be made up as a little sewing caddy. You could pop your little sewing bits and pieces in that pouch as well, and pop your clips on her ears, and of course she's filled with polyester filling, so she could easily be a little pin cushion. So I'm sure you've all got a million ideas, and you can certainly go for very, very extreme colours. Some really bright and wonderful kangaroos would be lovely to see. I'm looking forward to see what you do with them all. I certainly hope you've enjoyed making one of Australia's national treasures. Well, thank you all for joining me today and making up this lovely little project. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, you could give me a thumbs up. That would be absolutely beaut. I have quite a few coming up in this series. There's going to be a little penguin and Mama. I'm thinking of doing a little Mama series, so all with their little babies. So make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss any of those patterns. And if you follow me on Instagram, you can see sneaky peeks of them coming together. I also have a very sweet little vintage style pincushion coming up that you won't want to miss. And if you watch my stories on Instagram, you'll be able to see that little one coming together in the design process. If you want to send me pictures of the little projects you've made using my patterns, how about you follow me on Pinterest, and you can check out our Pinterest board, which is called You Made It, and it's called You Made It because you did, and you're doing wonderful work with my patterns. I'm loving seeing all those photos, but it's probably much easier for you to send me those photos direct to Pinterest. And then I can pin them directly from there. And it's a really great board. It's getting nice and full and it's very inspiring. So check it out, everybody, and see what everybody else is doing. So most of all, everybody, make sure that you all stay safe and make sure that you're always, always paying those good things forward. And until next time, it's hooroo from me.